Plato claims that justice is the health of the soul, and injustice is the sickness of the soul. Of all the things that justice could be, why would Plato think that justice is a kind of health? When we think of justice, we think of a system of rules for our conduct. We think of fairness. We think of people getting what they deserve. All of these things involve relationships between people. So it appears that it's our relationships with other people that can be just or unjust. That means that we will find justice first and foremost in the way that we treat one another. However, Plato thinks that justice is a property of an individual's soul. And more than that, he thinks that being just is a kind of health. Now, I can understand how being just would be a kind of duty. I have a duty to treat people fairly, just like I have a duty to tell them the truth or a duty to compensate other people for their labor. I can even see how justice would be a form of respect. We respect people by not making decisions for them. We respect people by not forcing our beliefs on them. We respect people by taking their points of view seriously. Sometimes we respect people, like our parents, by doing what they say, even when we disagree with them. Likewise, we might think that giving other people what they deserve and not taking advantage of them, that is, treating them justly, is a way of respecting the dignity inherent in a person. Of course, Glaucon has been trying to convince us that injustice is a kind of institution for pursuing our own individual benefit. If he's right, then being just belongs alongside the other ways we could pursue our benefit. Glaucon argued that when the weak person follows the rules, they're just choosing the best path towards their own advantage. Likewise, when the strong person evades the rules, they're just choosing the best path to their advantage. So being just and unjust are different ways of doing the same thing. But Plato doesn't take any of these options. He puts justice alongside physical health, under the class of health. He might think that justice involves duty or respect or getting what we want, but he thinks that justice is ultimately a form of health, a way of being healthy. What does Plato mean, and why should we agree with him? In the end, Plato thinks that health is an inner condition that enables a living thing to successfully perform its function, which is to maintain its own form. We'll spend the rest of this video lecture unpacking this claim. What you need to understand by the end of the lecture is what Plato means by health. You need to understand some of the key concepts in terms of which Plato defines health, and you should be able to roughly explain the connection between justice and health. We'll flesh out the details of Plato's argument in lecture and discuss the merits of his view in more detail there. Let's start with what Plato means by living thing. Plato thinks that we understand what something is when we grasp its function. Living things shouldn't be any different. We've mostly analyzed artifacts in class. They're a little easier to analyze because they have external goals. For example, a cheese knife aims at cutting a piece of cheese. So the knife aims at something other than itself. Namely, it aims at the cheese when it performs its function. And what it's aiming to do is get the cheese cut into pieces. That's what we mean by having an external goal. Living things are special because they're their own goals. Living things are set up to maintain and reproduce themselves. Everything they do aims at keeping themselves going and at reproducing themselves. Since we define something's function as what it does, that means that the function of a living thing is to keep themselves going. An example will help clarify this idea. A giraffe is designed to get high leaves that other creatures can't reach. A giraffe reaches with its long neck towards high up leaves. It selects leaves and avoids thorns with its long, dexterous tongue, and it grinds them up with flat teeth. The goal of all of this is not just getting the leaves down, it's nutrition. And the giraffe needs nutrition so that it can keep its neck strong and flexible, its tongue mobile and dexterous, and its legs capable of moving it around well so that it can get from tree to tree and find better and more edible leaves. So the giraffe eats leaves in order to keep itself capable of eating leaves, like in the way that a giraffe does, with its long neck and long tongue. We can abstract from this example and draw out a philosophical lesson. A giraffe is designed to enable it to do certain things. That is, it's designed to fulfill certain functions. But all of the things that it does, its functions, aim at maintaining that design. So the design keeps its function going, and the functioning keeps the design going, and by maintaining its design, it's enabling itself to continue functioning, and by continuing to function, it's keeping its design going, and so on and so forth. This is what we mean by when we say that the function of a living thing is to maintain itself. All the things that it do don't aim at accomplishing other goals. Its goal points back at itself. It's to keep itself going and to maintain its design. Notice how we find different form-function patterns in living things and in artifacts. A knife's design, a sharp blade, a sturdy handle organized in a way that makes it easy to hold, and the way that all these things are set up together, enable it to fulfill the function of cutting something. But the function aims at something else, that is, what the knife is cutting. A living thing is designed to enable it to keep things that keep its design going. A living thing is designed to enable it to do things that keep its design going. So, a knife has an external goal, whereas living things are their own goals. Notice that Plato officially says that living things maintain their own forms. He doesn't use the word design like I have. We'll talk more about what form means when we discuss Plato's allegory of the cave. The important point for now is that Plato is not referring to the actual way the parts are set up. Rather, by design or by form, he's referring to the blueprint. What I should say is when Plato uses the word form, and when I paraphrase that as design, the metaphor we can use is a blueprint. When you build a house, it may deviate from the blueprint in lots of ways. But that doesn't change the fact that the blueprint was still the plan, and that plan guided the construction throughout. Likewise, when Plato talks about living things forms, he's talking about the ideal blueprint, not the way that the thing was actually constructed, not the way that that actual creature was actually put together and approximates the blueprint. To say that a living thing aims to maintain its own form is to say that it is constantly trying to function in a way that's guided by and striving to achieve that ideal design that's sketched out in the blueprint. Thus, the function of a living thing is to maintain the ideal form, or the best approximation of it possible, not to maintain the way that it's currently set up right now. This is important for the following reason. Suppose a giraffe were sick. Then if it were to maintain its actual design, then that would mean it would try to stay sick. If health is maintaining its own form, then that would mean that staying sick would be a form of health. Plato's trying to rule out this kind of inconsistency by insisting that by the word form, we're referring to the ideal and not the actual plan that the giraffe's design follows. The last idea that we need to address in our definition of health is the idea that health is an inner condition. An external condition would be the sum of relations that I have to external objects around me. You might paraphrase external condition as something like environment. An inner condition refers to the relationship amongst the parts that compose me. Remember that for Plato, those parts are defined by their functions. That is, what they do to contribute to the overall function of the thing that we're dealing with. So, The inner condition refers to the interconnected roles that the parts play within the whole that enable it to perform its overall function. For our thinking about health, the important idea is that those parts can be constituted in different ways. And some ways will be better than others at enabling a living thing to keep its form going. Consider our giraffe again. If the giraffe's neck becomes damaged and it can't reach high up anymore, then the tongue won't be able to grab leaves as well, nor will the teeth chew up as many leaves. Likewise, a damaged neck would affect the way a giraffe walked, probably slowing it down and making it harder to get from tree to tree. The point is that the function of one part affects how well the function of many other parts can be fulfilled. Having a damaged neck is an internal condition that does not enable the giraffe to function well, and in turn it can't keep its form going. The less food that the giraffe gets, the worse it will function, until eventually it ceases to function altogether. When functions begin to break down, those functions also change the way that the giraffe is set up. They change its actual design, making it less and less able to perform its function. In short, when the giraffe can't perform its function very well anymore, the giraffe's form also begins to break down. And that's because the function of a giraffe just is to keep its giraffeness, its form, going. So, not fulfilling its function well means not keeping its form going. A constitution in which all functions cooperate and support one another is what we call health, according to Plato. A constitution in which all of our functions pull against one another and tend towards disintegration of our form is what we call sickness. One more example will sharpen the point. Consider a human heart. Its function is to pump blood. One might think that pumping blood in high volumes would be a virtue of a heart if we didn't know anything about hearts, except that its function were to pump blood. But if the heart pumps too hard, then it can overwhelm our circulatory system. And we all know that high blood pressure leads to a whole heap of medical problems. A heart only functions well when it's doing just what it needs to promote the proper functioning of other body parts. For example, when I'm exercising, I need to get more oxygen to my muscles, my lungs, my heart, my circulatory system will all adjust to accomplish this. I need less oxygen when I'm just sitting around. And if my circulatory system stayed in exercise mode when I was just sitting around, then I'd have reason to be worried. Bodily health in this case involves the lungs working in a way that gets the oxygen into the blood that the muscles need, and the heart pumping blood fast enough to keep the rich oxygen supply flowing, and the muscles efficiently converting the oxygen into usable energy, etc. Only when all of my organs support one another's function am I healthy. For this reason, Plato thinks that health is a kind of harmony of function. In other words, each part plays its role and does not meddle in the functioning of other parts. The meddling part sounds kind of strange when we're thinking about the body, but we can make sense of it. If a heart suddenly starts pumping rigorously of its own accord, then a whole lot of other organs will have to change their functioning to handle it, to keep up. In this case, the heart would be metaphorically meddling in the affairs of other functions by forcing them to do something that does not contribute to them achieving their own functions. Back to our big idea. Plato thinks that justice is the health of the soul. If health is a kind of harmony in the functions, if it's the integration of all of our parts in a holistic form of functioning that contributes to all of them, then justice must be a harmony of the soul. Indeed, this is exactly how Plato thinks of justice. He says that justice is each part of the soul doing what it is especially well suited to do and not trying to meddle in the affairs of the other parts of the soul. This is just one kind of constitution. Plato thinks that there are other ways that the parts of our soul could relate to one another. But when each does what it is best suited to do, then he thinks that's when all parts will flourish, and that's what justice is. If the parts don't stick to what they're best at, that is when the soul is unjust, then Plato thinks that the soul will tend to disintegrate, just like a sick body will disintegrate when the functions of a body aren't all harmoniously interconnected and well integrated. That's why he thinks that justice is good for its own sake. Here's the really intriguing idea that comes out of all of this. If justice is a kind of health, and the value of health is integrity, by integrity we mean uniting all of the parts in a unified, holistic function, such that a whole can maintain itself and persist, then the idea that a whole could become sick means that we could cease to be persons in some sense. We could cease to be well-integrated persons. We could cease being a whole person, and we could, in some sense of the word, fall into chaos. This is what Plato's getting at when he talks about the self being at civil war. When we're sick, when we're unjust, Plato's claiming, there's a sense in which we don't have a unified self. Rather, we have a fragmented self. How justice accomplishes the unity of self, we'll think through a little bit more in class. But the main idea is that to be just, a soul must have each part performing the function to which it's particularly well suited. When each part performs the function for which it's particularly well suited, all the parts do better, and they're integrated in a whole. When the parts don't function in that way, they tend to pull one another apart, and the soul disintegrates, the self disintegrates. For now, our goal is only to see how justice and health could be plausibly connected. In class, we'll talk more about whether or not justice is in fact the kind of constitution that enables a soul to function in a way that maintains its integrity, i.e. its wholeness. And we will explore ways that other constitutions lead the soul to disintegrate. For now, to remind you, you should just make sure that you can understand the definition of health that we've discussed here, and that you can explain each of its component concepts. Finally, you should be able to explain roughly how health and justice, as Plato understands them, are connected.